Okay, so this short video is just an overview of the quant assessment for Module 1 that you just did, and my objective here is really just to kind of highlight things to watch out for. This is not a key, so in going through this, I'm not going to provide answers, but I'm going to provide clues or things to watch out for, in particular things that people tend to miss more often than not. Anyway, so let's go to the next page. And again, since this is the first quant assessment, what I do on the second page is really just set up, the scoring with the out of 10, and you have to get 80% to get a satisfactory. But probably more importantly, I try and provide, what we'll do is we'll kind of check off these boxes as to let you know the kinds of mistakes that you've made on your quant assessment. And again, the idea here is to give you some pretty quick feedback. More often than not, most students tend to make the same kind of mistakes again and again. And so what we're trying to give you is information so you can avoid making these same mistakes in the future. Okay, so let's go to the next page. Okay, so first problem, list the supply curve shifters. This is just one of those problems where you just have to memorize the items. And again, if you're somewhat vague on one or more of these items, then you won't get the full credit for the answer. Because again, there's no partial credit on these assessments, so you have to get everything right within each problem. Next, define the complement goods. So remember, you have to be talking about two goods and characterizing that price quantity relationship in terms of change in price of the first good and the change in the quantity demanded for the other good. Third problem, I'm asking you to identify the shifter category for a substitute good. And this is a briefly explained problem. So what's happening here is you should be starting off by defining a substitute good and then working through how the substitute good, how the price change in one good impacts the quantity demanded for the other good, and then connect that to a shift in either supply or demand of the first good or the second good, and then explaining the direction of that shift. And remember those key, one of those two key phrases in explaining a shift. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. Okay, so this question is one of these questions where I give you some information. In this case, what I'm giving you is information regarding agricultural research and indicating its the impact of tomatoes on the consumption of tomatoes and its impact on the risk of heart disease. So what I'm giving you is information, but I'm giving you two different markets here, and what you have to do is figure out which of the markets is impacted. It's important to note that I'm giving you some information regarding how cotton and tomatoes are related. The question is this information relevant or not to the question I'm asking? So basically what you have to do is use that information regarding the impact of agricultural research in that tomatoes decrease the risks of heart disease. Then you have to figure out which of the markets is impacted, which direction, but the key thing is we're talking about the short run, the immediate impact. Not like what will happen and then this happens and then this happens. What's the very first thing that will happen? Okay, so again, that's all that's being asked here is you're just drawing the graph. Okay, so you have something to draw, you draw it, and then you move on to the next problem. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so from this information and from the picture that you've already generated, you're asked to indicate the appropriate shifter category. So if it's a supply shifter, it's one of those 6 supply shifters. if it's a demand shifter, it's one of the 5 demand shifters. So all that you need to write here is just which category are you talking about. Now the next problem is looking at the justification for the direction of the shift. So in answering this question, keep in mind in the problem 4 on the previous page, you've already drawn the picture. You've already drawn the curve that's shifted. You've already indicated the direction. So in this briefly justify question, I'm not asking you to repeat what you've already done. I mean, you can do that to kind of build towards the justification, but basically speaking, you have to explain why you did what you did. So again, in any time you justify the direction of a shift, you're having to use one of the 2 key phrases that we've mentioned in class. And in doing that, you have to connect the direction of the shift, those phrases, and connect it to the information I've provided you. Again, in the previous problem, number 5, you've already indicated the category. So just simply repeating the category, repeating the direction of the shift, or even just repeating the information regarding the decrease in the risk of heart disease will not get you full credit. You have to kind of put that story together. And I've done this in class, or I've kind of worked you guys through this. You're providing a story of why it all makes sense, how it all comes together. So it's not a super complicated problem, but the trick is not simply stopping at the repetition of the information you've already provided. Okay? So again, number 6 is more likely to be a bit of a problematic problem, but if you don't get it right this time, you come talk to me, we sort it out, and then you should get it right the next time if you need to do a retake. Okay? Next problem, or next page. Okay, so in this question, you're asked, you're identifying the idea of complements, and all I'm asking you to do is indicate, is the sign of the cross price elasticity positive or negative? So you just give me one of those 2 answers. Then you have to briefly explain why the cross price elasticity is that particular sign. So again, all you're doing is working through, well, if you're talking about complements, identify a pair of goods that are complements, work through the change in terms of if the price of one good changes, you have to work through to show, to explain why the quantity demanded changes of the other good. And again, you're providing that story that connects why the sign is positive or negative. You're also having to make sure you're clear as to what is a cross price elasticity. So this answer should be short, but incorporates some critical information that you have to make sure to pass along. Okay? So let's move on to the next problem. So I give you some information regarding weekly income, steak, spaghetti, creme brulee. And I ask you to calculate. So again, I'm always trying to indicate with the underlined word what you're supposed to do. So you're supposed to calculate the income elasticity of demand. So remember, the only way we know how to calculate elasticities on our own is you need 2 points. And again, you have 2 different incomes and 2 different pairs of consumption for steak, spaghetti, creme brulee. So you have to use that arc elasticity formula. Okay, so again, make sure you set up the formula, put in at least 1 step so we can see that you're showing your work and that you're doing it right. So if you're not doing it right, if you show your work, we can show you where the problem might have occurred. But again, you have to use an arc elasticity formula for this. The next problem is indicating that you need to interpret again. So that's you're going to generate a value in problem 8. You're taking that value, you're not leaving it in a ratio. You're taking that value, putting it over 1, and then interpreting the income elasticity of demand. Okay, so when you're dealing with elasticities, you have to make sure you're dealing with key phrases. You're having to make sure that you're incorporating this idea of percentage. And again, if it's, this is a problem that, again, people are more likely than not to make a mistake on, but you should really only make the mistake once. If you have to retake it, coming to talk to me should clarify any problems regarding the interpretation idea. Okay, next page. Okay, so this is probably the most challenging of the problems. So it says a producer is faced with raising the price of one of two goods. One good's elasticity of demand is inelastic. The other good's elasticity of demand is elastic. So you've got two different goods with two different elasticities or types of elasticities. I'm not giving you any values, and I'm asking you which good should have its price increased and briefly explain why. And there's a typo, there shouldn't be a question mark there. Anyway, so what you need to do is reflect back on our the exercise we did in class when we looked at the three situations: a good with elastic demand elasticity, unit demand elasticity, and inelastic demand. And then we came to a conclusion as to what happens in all cases if the price increases, quantity demand falls, but between the inelastic and elastic goods, there's a big difference in a different way. Okay, so hopefully this will be helpful. Shortly after taking the quant assessment, you're most interested in figuring out how you did, and this will give you a chance to reflect on what you did before you even get the test back. Okay, so good luck on that reflection, and I will see you in class.